Nobody's born incredible. People who do incredible things simply took the right steps. This is our journey. This is the hunt for incredible. In this episode, we continue our conversation with Mike Mulvey. For a quick recap, Mike is the creative director of a software agency out of the Bay Area and former designer at Apple. He currently oversees the visual and experiential design elements of software products, as well as advises on brand creation for startups and various product offerings. In this episode, we get to dive into one of my favorite topics and his expertise, which is brand development. We go through the full cycle of what should be considered for a brand, what prerequisites and questions should be answered before diving into the visual elements, which a lot of people, when they hear the word brand, they think of the logo and the colors, but really it's deeper than that. It's the feeling that's invoked by the customer and the thoughts that they have about your brand that determine it. So what questions need to be answered before we even get to the part of designing a logo? This has been a super fun conversation to have with a good friend, and I really enjoyed it. So I hope you do too. All right, I'd love to now segue into how you think about branding and apply it to businesses. At the beginning of a project, when you are doing an initial brand design and coming up with the graphics and the voice of the customer, the tone of voice, I should say, you go into such depth of how you think about the company and what they do. Can you share a bit about what your process is when you're thinking about coming up with a brand for a client?
Yeah. First off, you're lucky if you get to do a brand like completely. And I've only done a few in my career, and we've worked on a few projects before where you've seen some of that. And part of the important part of branding that seems counterintuitive for clients and for designers who haven't done branding is that some of the most important parts of it are non-visual. Like it's about what is your concept? Like, what do you stand for? I worked on a product for Fidelity Investments over 10 years ago. And I worked with some really talented, more talented than me, designers and art directors helping me construct a brand workshop for Fidelity. And that's when I started learning about brand mantras, the difference between a mantra, a mission statement, a tagline, right? So because what you find out is once you lay down all this, like, what do you stand for? What is your mission with your company or your product? Is that everything else you have a blueprint now to create everything else. So once right, like for Nike, their tagline is just do it, right? That's for marketing and advertising. Their brand mantra is authentic athletic experience, right? And their mission is honoring great athletes. So anytime you see any touch point with a Nike product, it's, whether it's advertising, their website, historically, it's about honoring athletes, right? Sometimes you don't even see in their advertising, sometimes you don't even see the product, right? I think Steve Jobs mentioned that there's an old marketing video of Steve Jobs, and he mentioned that. He's like, sometimes you don't even see the shoe in the ad, so you see the athlete. So when you have that brand mantra and that mission statement, when you have a question like, should we do this new campaign? All you have to do is ask yourself, well, is it true to our mission statement? Are we honoring, with whatever this new thing is, we're doing this new campaign, are we honoring great athletes? Is it representing authentic athletic experience, right? And then once you have those mantras and mission statements figured out, you can start, then it becomes easier to create the logo, right? This is the difference between branding and identity. The identity would be the logo, the typography, all the visual aspects of the brand. And for a client, they just want to see the fun, twinkly stuff that you design. So it can be hard for them to go through this journey of like going through a brand workshop, figure out what their values are, who's their audience, coming up with a brand mantra, all these, because it seems like we're delaying getting to the good stuff, and you have to convince them that this will get us to the good stuff. And it's discouraging how many people with a lot of money that start new companies don't understand the value of that, right? Like, I think one of the things I think you thought was interesting, which I said some people don't have a brand, they have a company, they have people and a logo, right? That's not a brand. Because once you have a brand, then you have something emotional, like a brand, like brands should evoke something when you think of fill in the blank, whatever brand, Hermes or Nike or Apple or Google or Android or whatever it is, right? When you say that word, it brings to mind a certain feeling, or it brings to mind things. And if it doesn't, then you don't have a brand. So yeah, it's, if you can find a client or clients that do value that, and there are a lot of big, if you're lucky enough to get a lot of big clients, they do already, right? If you have a client like Target or Apple or Nike, or a lot of big, Shopify, things like that, they'll understand it. But it's amazing how many clients you're just like, they don't want to put in the work to make a brand.
The quote that I heard you say a while back, and we brought it up recently as well, is a brand isn't what you say about your company, it's what others say about your company. Something
Yeah.
to that effect, right?
Yeah, that was a quote from Marty Neumeyer. He has a book called The Brand Gap, which is required reading for if you're interested in branding. And that's something he says. People decide what your brand is. And if you're consistent with delivering on what your promise is, then you should be in alignment with your audience, with your customers. But if you're not, then if there's a disconnect, then they're going to be saying something different than we say. We're trustworthy and respectful of your money. And if you're not, then they're going to say, yeah, they're a bunch of crooks, and they don't, this banking institution doesn't do that. And I can't get my money out of my bank account. So then you have a disconnect. Yeah, it's what they say it is. A lot of companies want to think, well, it's my company, I say what goes, and it's like, not for.
Yeah. Well, it's also back to, it's not about what you say, it's about what people hear. So what are they hearing and picking up and perceiving of what you are trying to say? So if you're trying to say, I'm a good steward of money, invest your money with me, then like you might be saying those things, but are they hearing those things through your actions and how you present yourself and how they view you being a steward of other people's money, and all of those other elements that can oftentimes get lost on businesses?
Yeah. It took a while for me to really understand what branding is. And even, I start in the last few years, I've started my own side project, I've been developing my own brand. And it's funny because it started back in 2007 with just an idea for like the name of a company, but it had nothing to do with branding. And it was funny where it took me so long. I've been doing branding for companies for so long. Part of what I didn't do a lot of branding. And it took me like until I'm 43 years old to figure out, why am I not doing it for my project? It was like weird. I never made that connection for, this project that I'm working on. And I'm like, wait, this is not a brand yet. This is just a website and a logo. It's like, it's not a brand yet. I was like, oh, that's what I need to do. So I had to do my own little brand workshop for myself. It was like, but it took me forever to make that connection. I felt stupid.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you. I've done the same thing on my projects, like this fourplex that we have, and some of the other like the podcast or content creation, where I'm so busy in life that sometimes I skip a handful of steps on my own things, and then I realize like, no, there's value in going through the steps in the process. So taking a step back and saying, okay, how would I actually organize this for a client? It's almost like they say like mechanics have the worst cars, because they're so busy working on other people's things that it's like, okay, go through the steps that you believe in because it adds value, and then develop your own stuff. So speaking of your projects, tell us a little bit about yours.
So the one I've been trying to invest more time in is like, I guess for lack of a better word, you'd call it like a lifestyle brand. I don't like that word, but I like designing t-shirts and screen printing. About 10 years ago, it was around 2012, 2013. I realized that I'd been doing digital design for so long that I missed that thing that I left back in college. I missed that CMYK world of like making stuff, like, the posters here that I have from like different artists and designers. Like I miss that tactile, like making physical objects. So I learned silk screening and screen printing back in college, and I decided I'm going to dust off that skill and so I bought a kit from the art supply store, a novice kit on screen printing, where you take a light bulb and you expose it to a screen covered in emulsion. And I started making single color prints. But prior to that, back in 2007, I was playing this board game. It's like where you have to sketch and someone has to guess what you're sketching. It was one of the holidays. I think it was like Thanksgiving. I was home at my parents' house in New Jersey, and my brother and I were on a team, and my brother and I sort of operate on a very similar wavelength. We can, not read each other's minds, but with a sibling, you sort of anticipate what they're going to say. And so he would just draw a line and I'd be like, sword. And they're like, how did you get that? So he drew this great picture, which it's still on my blog that I used to keep. I kept a blog for about 16 years. It's still on there. There's a post of it. It was a wolf in sheep's clothing, and he drew this really hilarious wolf with this goofy, puffy coat and some claws and this funny face. And he didn't know it, but I kept it and I put it in my pocket. And then a couple of years later, I said, I had this idea where I wanted to do a brand called I like the idea of a wolf in sheep's clothing as a brand. Like that was a cool concept, right? Just this idea of like a wolf in sheep's clothing. But that was too obvious a name. So I was texting my brother one day and I said, dude, I have that sketch you did when we were playing Cranium at Thanksgiving. And he's like, you kept that? I said, yeah. He's like, I didn't know that. He's like, I'm like, well, I want to use it as I want to base whatever the logo ends up being on this idea of a wolf in sheep's clothing. But I don't like that word. So this was like, I realized I was using my brother like ChatGPT. I was using him for like ideas. I said, well, what should I call it? He's like, what about stay vigilant? And I was like, that's it. Like it's stay vigilant. So, I got a tax ID, I incorporated that name. And it sort of sat on the back burner until recently. I'd say in the last 5 years, where I started working on logos, where I narrowed it down to just a wolf's eye. Like I learned in college, I iterated on a bunch of different versions in Adobe Illustrator and a lot of sketchbooks over here that have sketches. And then I dug a little deeper and I'm like, what is it about stay vigilant? And I was like, well, what if it was about keeping your eyes open to things that are important, like you're being vigilant, right? There's obviously like a dangerous aspect of the term stay vigilant, right? Like you're protecting yourself from danger, but like, what if it was more positive? What if it was like people, like what if Stay Vigilant was a company that honored people in various industries that are vigilant about the things that are important in their career and their life, right? So whether it's a comedian who's really keeping like their eyes and their teeth, like what are they sinking their teeth into? What do they have their eyes on and their teeth in? And that's when I was like, okay, now we're getting into branding, because then this is something that people can that you can apply to your own situation, where it's like, what are you staying vigilant about in your life? So it's sort of like a call to action, right? It's not just about being on the defensive and being vigilant and waiting till something happens. It's about being proactive with your career, your life, fill in the blank, whatever is most important to you. Are you being vigilant about that? And then I created a brand deck for, basically put myself through the process that I usually put my clients through, which I was like, this is so, I don't know why I didn't do this before. And I just do it anytime I had free time. And I showed it to a few friends a few years ago. I showed them the whole deck of like mood boards and photography ideas and mission statements and mantras and all these things. And they said, when did you find time to do this? And I was like, it was easy finding time, but yeah, it was, so that's what I've been, and it's been difficult because I'm in a situation where I actually like what I do for a career. So it's not like I'm absolutely disgusted and uninspired in my career, so I need to get out to do my passion project. I'm in a situation where I enjoy what I do as a creative director, so I haven't been developing my personal brand as much as I should be, which is a weird position to be in.
How do you think about, not to tie that into another real life application, something that we've run into with some of our other clients, how do you think about brands that have multiple offerings, almost like two separate products that they want to build in tandem together? So for example, I'm running into a similar situation. It sounds like what you just brought up, which is why I thought of it, around my personal brand and the podcast brand.
Yeah.
And those two things are very tied together,
Yeah.
because the podcast is the purest expression of myself. I am genuinely so deeply interested in how
Yeah.
peak performers operate and how they think, which is
Yeah.
why literally like the first meeting I had with you, I thought I need to get close to this guy because I saw that spark of peak performance. And this podcast is the purest expression of that for me. So
Yeah.
I'm deeply tied to it, but I also think it's important to have a distinction between my personal brand and the podcast because I mean, I'm plagued with the curse of vision of seeing all the different directions this podcast could go. It could
Yeah.
go the direction of, something like Vice, where there are people traveling around the world on a show, identifying things that are incredible about people or cultures, or it could go the education route. Like I bought becomingincredible.com, where it's like there could be an entire education brand around developing people to become incredible, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Million different directions to take it. And I'd love to build momentum and let it grow as a brand independent of me.
Yeah, but see, like you still have in that what you just mentioned, you still have things that in there, if you distill it down, it's still true to I don't know what your mission statement is, but like, right, like it could be metaphorical hunt for incredible, or it could be a hunt like that's an awesome extension where you're actually hunting for it. Like, yeah, I'm on location in this part of the world. I found this person who does this strange activity that they've been doing for 20 years. Like, so yeah, I mean, you just have to. I think the thing is like not to discard those ideas, but try to. The trouble is finding the focus, saying not discarding it, but putting it to the side and saying like, well, let's just do the podcast and the show or whatever, right? Like that's the hard part.
Yeah, yeah,
Because I did the same thing with Stay Vigilant, where I've thought about, well, it could be a podcast. I could interview people about, similar to this. I could interview people that are staying vigilant, that I think are remarkable artists or creators. It could be, it's going to be the things that I create or things I've created in the past, selling them online. So I think it's good to think of multi-prong business ideas so that you're not just putting all your eggs in one basket and you're like, well, I just make these things. And this is the only medium I work in. I think I wouldn't say it's for everybody, but I think it's wise to think about like, well, how could it be on social media or in products or in software, and I think it's important to keep an open mind, right? And that's a hard thing too for a lot of people when they get older. Your mind tends to close down a lot as you get older. One of the things that was really useful for me with having a brand, the logical thing that you do with a brand is it's going to be a business. You have to sell things. Is like I was doing Kickstarter back in 2012, and I did a poster for. It was a Steve Jobs quote, and Steve Jobs said, "A computer is like a bicycle for the mind." So I did a silhouette. I didn't actually screen print it. I had a place in Austin, Texas, screen print it. I had the design, and they did the printing. I didn't have the means to do it myself, and I did a limited edition. I did like iPods. I did a black and a white version of the poster, and it was Steve Jobs silhouette with bicycle pedals and gears going through his brain, sort of. And one of the things that Kickstarter taught me was how to create a project, right? Like we talked about this before the call, but like creating things without money, right? Where I didn't need any money to launch that Kickstarter project. It got funded back in 2012, 2013. I raised like $6,000. So like peanuts. I broke even on the project, but it was a proof of concept that I could design something, present it as, I mocked it up as if it was a real thing. I showed a prototype of the poster. So I think that it's important for a lot of people to realize, again, it's not for everyone, but there's so many things you don't need money for to launch, right? Like, I mean, a podcast, you need a few things, but you don't need a ton. You don't have to take out a loan to do a podcast. You don't have to take out a loan to do, like, I was like, I'm just working with ink and paper. I'm making a poster. That's it. And I did some stickers too. And I think it's a good way to see if you have what it takes to just create something from scratch. A lot of people make excuses like, oh, I don't have the means to do that. It's like, you should do, like, Kickstarter taught me to do everything before I start asking for money. So do all the things, design it, figuring out how much it's going to cost, how much the shipping is going to be, all these things, so that when I hit launch on the Kickstarter, it's just about the money, and the money short is sort of like, that's an afterthought. Like that's just paying for what I already made. So that was a really, that was a really good for me to, I did a few Kickstarter projects. Half of them failed. A few of them got funded, but I think it's good. That was good practice for, not for branding, but for learning how to sell your stuff.
Yeah. And getting that rep in, that's amazing to be able to break even on that first rep of getting it out the door.
Oh yeah, I didn't care. I wasn't doing it for money. I was like, in fact, one of I broke even, which I'm like, that's fine. I paid for I bought myself a printer because I realized that I was printing out these postcards, and I realized it's cheaper for me to buy a dope ass printer than pay somebody to do the printing. So I was able to buy some stuff for myself in the process. And then the coolest part of that Kickstarter project was one of the posters I had to ship to One Infinite Loop Cupertino. So somebody at Apple got my poster, and I was like, all right, yeah. So I'm like somewhere in Apple, my poster maybe is hanging, or it was hanging. I don't know.
Dude, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Oftentimes too, commenting on people noting, needing money to get an idea out there or to gain traction and momentum is oftentimes, I think people, they're actually just fearful of getting their idea out there. And so they tell themselves, oh, I don't have money, or I don't have this or that, when really there are solutions around not having money. Like you commented earlier, and we touched on it here, about how you should be able to do almost anything in design without money, especially if you're smart about selling it before you incur that cost. So can you sell your idea before you actually purchase the material or what have you? Can you post your concept and the design on Kickstarter before you actually purchase 1,000 posters to distribute or whatever it is?
Yeah. Like, and it also forces you to, well, first of all, the other thing too is don't talk about your idea until you make it, because I've found, and I don't know where I read this, but I've found it to be true that in psychology, something happens when you, like, if I told you, Gideon, I have a new idea for a new type of software technology. I haven't built anything. I just have an idea for it. As soon as I tell you that idea, what happens in my brain is that it becomes real, even though it's not. And I act like it exists out in the world. And then I'm less motivated to actually build it, because I've released it. It's a concept now, versus if you keep it to yourself, you work on it. And then I say, Gideon, check out this software I built, right? It's something like it's important to like not to tell people about an idea until you've actually, like, a lot of times people say, I have an idea for this Kickstarter. I'm like, well, okay, we'll break it down. Like, it's important to break it down, right? Okay, so you have an idea for a poster. So what's the poster about? It's about this quote. It's like, all right, well, how many colors, like, what are the dimensions, like breaking something, like getting really into the details. I'm making a podcast. Okay, well, is it remote or is it in person? Do you have a studio? Do you have what sort of hardware do you have right now? What do you have to get? Do you have to get microphones? Do you have to get lights? Are you doing video too? A lot of people never leave the idea phase. I have an idea for right. We've heard it. Like, I have an idea for an iPhone app. Yeah, everybody does. Nobody goes beyond the idea phase, like into like the executing phase, like coming up with. We've both worked on projects for mobile apps, and you've remembered how many screens how many user flows you have to come up with. When you show that to somebody who just has an idea for an app, they pass out, because they're like, we didn't realize there was that much work involved. It's like,
right. Yeah. But if you take action and start putting one foot in front of the other, you realize the amount of work involved. And then you realize you thought you were just climbing a hill at first. You're actually climbing Mount Everest. But that's fine. As long as you just keep putting one foot in front of the other and you enjoy the process, you'll get to
that. And that either excites you or it scares you, right? Some people just dig in and they're like, this, I love this. Or they say, oh yeah, this is way too much work. So that separates the doers from the not doers.
Right. And how do you respond to that exhilaration that makes it either excitement or fear? For example, I read a study on how the feeling of excitement and fear of public speaking are in your brain chemically the same. Of course, I'm not a neuroscientist, but in this article, it talked about how the only thing that changes is your disposition towards that feeling. So in
Right.
this study, it referenced musicians that will get tingly sensations on the tips of their fingers before they play a show, and how they view that as exciting. Whereas
Yeah.
there are other people who are fearful of public speaking or doing anything in front of people, and that same tingling sensation is a trigger to them that they're doing something dangerous and they need to withdraw.
Right.
Basically, yeah, the study was saying, what is your perception towards it? How do you actually view that sensation? And can you shift it? Can you update your software, not your hardware, but update your software to
Yeah.
actually process that chemical change differently, such that the thing that used to give you anxiety is actually an exciting activity that you can lean into?
Yeah, totally. That, and one of the other mindsets that you have to get into as a person in any creative field, whether it's writing or music or design, is that, at least for me, knowing that the first thing that comes out of my, that I put into Figma or Photoshop or whatever onto the page, it's gonna be bad. Knowing that, like, I have to get the bad ideas out of my head before I get to the good ideas. So that's something that if you're not used to, it's discouraging, because you're like, oh, like, this looks like crap. Like, but I keep all my old stuff. But it's like, yeah, you have to go through that. But as soon as you're cool with, like, okay, I know these ideas I'm gonna put an effort into it, but I know they're not gonna be good. It makes, with logos or designs or whatever, it's cool to have a whole Illustrator file of logos and seeing, like, the shitty first one and then seeing the one that's like, because then you see the transformation. So, like, yeah, if you're in the right mindset, it doesn't, like that, like you said, it's anxiety or excitement. It's like, for some people it'll be discouraging, but other people are like, okay, it's like, it's sort of back to that Seinfeld quote, like, whatever torture in life you're most comfortable with. It's like, yeah, this is the part of the project where I make a bunch of crappy stuff and it's not fun. So yeah.
100%. John Mayer described his creative process as he plays guitar. I actually made a post about this. He'll play guitar and just sing openly and come up with lyrics on the spot and just pour out all of his ideas
Yeah.
before, at the very end of a 20 minutes of just doing this, the good ideas come out. It's
Yeah.
almost like you can analogize it to turning on a water spout, and at first it's just dirty, filthy water that's coming out. But if you let enough of that dirty, filthy water come out, eventually the clean, nice water will come out. I used to run design workshops, design based on the practice of design thinking. And one of
Yeah.
the exercises that we would do to come up with new product ideas or innovate on whatever problem we were running into is we would have people generate 10 ideas in 10 minutes.
Uh-huh.
And what you'd find is the first 1 to 3 ideas were usually ideas that had been percolating in someone's mind. So it's a problem that we've all been thinking about for
Yeah.
a while, and they get out the ideas that they thought of. The following ideas were ideas that had crossed their mind, but they were not that great. And that's usually ideas 3 to 6. And then the last 4 ideas were often the ideas that people really struggled with, and they were against the clock, just trying to get something out in order to meet the quota. So many
Yeah.
times they were even perceived as throwaway ideas. And what we found was, at the end of this, it would typically be a team of 4 people. We'd get people in groups of 4. And so we'd have 40 ideas at the end. And then everybody would put their ideas on a board and vote on what they thought were the best ideas.
Yeah.
And about 75% of the time, the idea that was highest voted was one of the throwaway ideas, one of the last 3 to 4 ideas that
Yeah.
people were just getting out there to meet the quota. But they would have never
Right.
gotten to those ideas had they not poured out all of the thoughts that they had originally had leading up to it and let a new, different way of thinking come in. Because once you run out of those thoughts that have been percolating, you're forced to shift your perspective and think differently about something, and you're just cranking those ideas out.
Yeah. Yeah. I've found, on that note, I've also found, I remember the first time I did it, it was letting the client peek behind the curtain of how we work. I was working on this project with this really talented designer, Vika. And I was lucky enough to have her just working on iconography for a project. That's all. That was like the primary thing at the time that she was working on, is just icons, which is like, to have that sort of budget is very rare. So she was working on all these different icons for this application for Bloomberg that we were designing. We were designing and developing. And she was going through iterations. I still have the file, all these different great, some of them were great, some, some worked better than others, but just all polished. And we usually just show the client the final, what you're recommending. And the client was looking at I remember they were looking at the iconography and they were like, oh, this one's a little hard to read. And have you tried this? Or have you tried that? So I said, Vika, why don't you bring up on the big screen, bring up your file of all your iterations. And she's like, you sure you want to show the client that? I was like, yeah. So she brought it up. And normally that's just like a messy file with all these different things on it. But what happened is that the client really, they got to see that, oh, you guys are actually doing work. You're doing like a lot of work on this. This isn't just like you came up with a set of icons. And in this scenario, it really gave the client a better appreciation for the fact that, again, this is my career. This is not my job. Like we are designers and we take this very seriously. And like we did a whole bunch of versions, and then they start geeking out on it and they're looking at, oh yeah, the idea I had, you did it already. And actually it didn't work. And basically validating what we did, the direction we had chosen for the icons. But yeah, the iterating thing is, it's important.
Yeah, 100%. All right. We've come to one of my favorite times of the show, which is the rapid fire questions. So, yeah. Mike, when you hear the word incredible, what do you think of?
What do I think of when I think of incredible? I think of this podcast.
Hey. Now that's branding, my man. That is branding. Awesome. What are some books that have been the most profound to you in terms of getting you to where you are in terms of your awareness and being a peak performer?
I think I'm going to cheat and kind of answer this, sidestep your question. I think a lot of the people in my life that I mentioned, like professors and things, helped a lot. I'd say less so with books. There have been some books that I've read over the years, not really towards the beginning, but I guess it's like a muscle where it is important sometimes, even if you are operating at a high level, to keep reinforcing that. I really dug Atomic Habits. That was a great book. Reading other people's methodologies and journeys in being an artist or someone who creates things, like Stephen King has a great book called On Writing, where he talks about everything he went through to get to where he was, just all the practicing. And my brother introduced me to a great book years ago, like 15 years ago, called The Creative Habit by a choreographer named Twyla Tharp. That was a great book, which talks about, like the title, the habits that artists and people that make things, the habits that they get up every day, they do this, they do that. And it sounds boring, but having that structure, that was a really interesting book. Those are a few of the books. Yeah. There was a great little book. I still have it here. My first creative director in New York got me it. It's called It's Not How Good You Are, It's How Good You Want to Be. It's by this Mad Men advertising guy named Paul Arden. And it's really small, but it just has a lot of little nuggets of knowledge. And it was written a couple decades ago, but great little book.
What are some characteristics that you think an individual needs to adopt in order to become incredible in whatever ways they're trying to become incredible?
I think I mentioned it earlier, but curiosity is, I think, huge, because if you're not curious, then you're satisfied with the way things are operating, right? Curiosity is at the foundation, one of the things at the foundation, right? Obviously you have to have a solid, like a crazy work ethic, but if you're not curious, again, it gets back to like when I was with my dad, like figuring out why something was broken and like opening it up and fixing it. Like if you're not curious about like, what else could this company be? Could it be, could it be this? Could it be that? Not being satisfied, just being curious, like, what else is possible? If you're not curious, then that's not a good sign. Curiosity is, I think, the biggest one for me.
Yeah, the curiosity is almost the fuel for the work ethic. Like if you don't have the curiosity and it's just work, your odds of getting burnt out go up significantly, as opposed to if you're interested and passionate and curious about the thing. It's like almost like the curiosity pulls you forward as opposed to you having to push something forward.
Yeah. Like that's just awesome. Anything, right? Like with logos, like, well, I designed this Stay Vigilant logo. It looks, this eyeball, this wolf eye that I made looks great at this size. What does it look like super tiny? What does it look like super big? What does it look like if I invert it? What if it, what does it look like on, how would I print it on a dark background? How would I print it on a light background?
I'm convinced that the creative process and people who are highly creative like yourself, the skill is in the ability to cycle through multiple variations and identify the variations more rapidly. And you get more familiar with what variations are better the more frequently you cycle through those variations. So you being a like your visual design skills, having a lot of backing in when you were younger, sketching a lot. I remember previously you told me that you were always sketching and drawing growing up, and cycling through those variations so that now you have a lot of heuristics, a lot of areas that you're able to shortcut and say, oh, I'm more confident that this variation or this series of variations will do better because I have gone through thousands, possibly even millions of variations throughout my career of just trying different things and identifying what I like and dislike. Whereas somebody like me who hasn't done it before, it would take me significantly longer and the variations would be significantly worse starting right now in my visual design career, since I haven't gone through as many variations. So you're like speed through that curiosity and saying, oh, what does it look like if I, make the nose on this character bigger or smaller? How does it actually change the expression that the character is making if I turn its eyebrows in versus open them up, and different things like that?
Yeah. That's like with clients too. Like when a client has an idea, historically, a lot of people are like, well, don't listen to the client doesn't know what they're doing. Just, I'm the designer. I got this. Just try it. Try what they're saying. Like it might be an interesting idea. Like just try it. And that way you can either prove them wrong and be like, haha, I was right. It sucks. Or so I've been in situations where the client has a good suggestion. So again, be open, like it gets back to being open-minded and being curious. Like be curious that maybe their idea works. Also with like, you talked about Mid-Journey before. I think we both you went through that same obsessive period of Mid-Journey that I went through, where I was literally like at night just generating idea. Like it was bad. It was like I bought a subscription to it and I was burning through. But just not being afraid of like, there was this, remember at the beginning of 2023, like everyone was freaking out about AI is going to take everyone's jobs. And I was like, let's try this Mid-Journey out. And it was I've used it a bunch for generating images for Stay Vigilant for my blog. Yeah, don't be be curious about stuff.
I love that. So where can people find you?
Where can people find me? A few places. I've mentioned on this episode, stayvigilant.net is the very beginnings of my brand, my company, my creations, where I'll be selling things. I also like to take pictures of cars wherever I am in the world. So you can find me on Instagram at Combustion Chamber. I think those are the two main ones. That's where you can find me. Yeah.
It's been an absolute pleasure. It's always great talking to you. I really appreciate you being on the show.
Totally. This was fun.